To Second Chronicles, chapter 14. We're marching our way through. After we finish Chronicles, we're going to go back to the New Testament. We haven't been in, we finished the Gospels, and we're going to be heading up into the New Testament in a couple of weeks, but first we're going to finish up with Chronicles. Chronicles, I want to introduce you to a very fascinating person today, a king named Asa. He was king of Judah. A little history lesson. There was the Israel, 12 tribes. Under David, the nation came together, they defeated their enemies, and then his son Solomon became king. It was like the golden age in Israel's history. And then when Solomon died, his son became king and decided to raise the taxes, and that caused a revolt. And the kingdom split into two, not quite equal. There was the 10 tribes in the north, and there was 2 in the south. The 10 tribes in the north went completely off the rails, and set up, they made golden bulls, and they began to worship them as their god. And all sorts of hardships came their way because of that. And then there was the kingdom in the south, Judah. And Judah, for the most part, did a lot better in terms of following God. They had some big dips spiritually, but they also had some amazing revivals that took place along the way. And there was also constantly, there was civil war for about 400 plus years. There was civil war between North and South. So there was a lot of difficult times. Well, here we're introduced to Asa. He's given, when the book of Kings was written, he only gets chapter 15, verse 9 to 24. And the picture of him is a good king who had a heart after God, who was seeking God in his ways. So he got all of 20 verses or so, or less than 20 verses, and then you come to Chronicles, which is written 450 years later by the prophet Ezra, and it's a retrospect. He's retelling the history of Israel to the people who have just returned from being 70 years in Babylon in captivity. They come back, a ragtag little group, wondering, how do I fit into this world? Here I am in my country, which has been destroyed, and my security is at risk, because I don't know who's coming to attack me, and is God still for me? Is his promises still apply? How do I fit into this world? And is there continuity between my ancestors who came before and where I am in God's plan? And so Ezra says, hey, look, God still has a plan, and you're still his people, and he's still working, and so I want to teach you some lessons from your history. I want to remind you where you've come from. And Chronicles traces the line of David, which is the line of promise that ultimately leads to Christ. And so it's not a boring book at all, because when we read about the history, it's a history that tracks towards Jesus, of which you and I are part as the followers of Christ. And so we come to Asa, and Asa gets now 3 chapters. And if you look with me in chapter 14, we're going to look at some big lessons from the life of Asa, but particularly we're going to focus on chapter 16 this morning. But take a look first off. We're introduced to him. His father dies in verse 1. Then it says his son succeeded him as king. And in his days, the country was at peace for 10 years. So a nice start to your career as king. You're not having to fight any wars. In 10 years, it's like this. It says Asa, and here's the key thing about Asa. This is only said about 8 out of the 40 kings between north and south. There was about 40 kings. And only 8 of them get the stamp, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And sometimes that was even qualified by what he did such and such as well. And so it was not a great track record. He is actually one of the good ones. He's one of the stellar ones, but there's a little asterisk that we'll look at this morning in chapter 16. Asa did what was right and good in the eyes of the Lord his God. Now, how did he do so? Well, he removed the foreign altars and the high places. He smashed the sacred stones. He cut down the Asherah poles. He commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their fathers, and to obey his laws and commands. He removed the high places and the incense altars in every town of Judah, and the kingdom was at peace under him. And it carries on to list some of the things that he did on behalf of the country. So he had a real heart for God, and he says, you know what? We worship God. We don't worship the God of other nations. All this other stuff has to go, because our worship needs to be pure, just like our worship needs to be pure when it comes to Christ. And so he does this, and then later on in the chapter, there is a crisis moment. This huge army, he's got an army of about 600,000 people, which sounds like a lot until someone comes with an army twice the size. And then you realize that you're way outnumbered. Well, this happens. This king from Cush, which was, I believe, down in Africa, marches up through Egypt and comes against Judah with the intent of wiping them out. And Asa distinguishes himself by, it says in verse 11, then Asa called to the Lord. You see, he got ready for battle, but he knew this was not going to be, if it was just him and his strength and his people's strength, this was not going to be a long battle. He knew that they must call upon God if they were going to experience any success. And so in verse 11 it says, then Asa called to the Lord his God, and he said, Lord, there's no one like you to help the powerless against the mighty. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rely on you, and in your name we have come against this vast army. O Lord, you who are our God, do not let man prevail against you. And then God hands this huge army over to them, and they have a great victory. And it's a victory that they don't claim as their own. All the credit and all the glory goes to God. And in response to that, God sends this, in chapter 15, God sends this man named Azariah, son of Oded, and he speaks about how God was pleased with his response and how God was going to bless them. He encourages them to stay faithful. And in response to this word from the Lord, he continues the reforms that he started. He was even more excited. And so he does all that he can to lead the people in the ways of God. Now, if you stopped it, and if we stopped at verse 19 of chapter 15, it says there was no more war until the 35th year of Asa's reign. If he had died at that point and the history books were closed, he probably would have been regarded as the best king that Israel ever had. And that would be an open shut case. Except, we always have the except. When you roll to chapter 16, there's a little wrinkle that's thrown into the picture. And when Ezra's writing this, there's a particular reason that he gives chapter 16. Ezra usually sticks glosses over the negatives in people's lives. When we read about David, and Ezra gave the history of David, he skipped the part where David was killing Bathsheba's husband and that kind of thing. But he doesn't skip the sin that Asa commits, and it's for a particular reason, and we're going to talk about that as we go. So check out chapter 16. Keep in mind, Asa, he got the stamp of God's approval. He did what was right and good in the eyes of God, and yet there he had problems. And you and I can identify with this. It's always encouraging when we read about people in the Bible having problems and God being merciful to them, because it gives us hope. Because we got problems, and God's grace, which was extended to them, is also available to us as well. So that's why we got to have the whole story when it comes to reading the Bible. In the 36 years, so 35 years, there's this 20-year period of peace. In the 36th year of Asa's reign, Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. So what does Asa do? Does he call upon the Lord like he did the last time? Unfortunately not. It says, Asa proceeded to take the silver and the gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple. There's a little red flag right there that ought to go up when you're ripping off God's temple to pay someone to protect you. He emptied the Lord's temple, and then he emptied his own bank account, and he sent it to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. And he said, let there be a treaty between me and you, as there was between my father and your father. See, I'm sending you silver and gold. Now break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that he will withdraw from me. Ben-Hadad agreed. How could he not agree when someone sends you a huge pile of gold and silver? Ben-Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the towns of Israel. They conquered Ion, Dan, Abel-Maim, and all the store cities of Naphtali. And when Baasha heard about this, he stopped building Ramah and abandoned his work. And then, in response, King Asa then took all the people of Israel, all the men of Judah, and they carried away from Ramah the stones and timber that Baasha had been using, which he then built up Ebed and Mizpah. Now at this time, after he does this, at that time, Hanani the seer came to Asa, king of Judah, and he said to him, because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your hand. Were not the Cushites and the Libyans a mighty army with great numbers of chariots and horsemen? Yet when you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your hand. And then here's a critical verse. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. You have done a foolish thing. From now on you will be at war. Now, rather than responding humbly and accepting the rebuke of the prophet, it says Asa was angry with the seer because of this. He was in fact so enraged that he put him into prison. Didn't stop there. He also brutally oppressed some of the people. The events of Asa's reign from beginning to end are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. And then in the 39th year, so God tried to get his attention, in the 39th year of his reign, Asa was afflicted with a disease in his feet. And though his disease was severe, even in his illness, he did not seek the help from the Lord, but only from the doctors. Then in the 41st year of his reign, Asa died and rested with his fathers. They buried him in the tomb that he had cut out for himself in the city of David. They laid him on a bier covered with spices and various blended perfumes, and then they made a huge fire in his honor. Now, I find that kind of interesting how it ends. Even though the last 5 years of his life he was a lemon, let's say it, people were charitable. They evaluated his kingship on the whole, the 41 years, rather than the last 5. So they gave him a send-off that was basically sort of not looking at the last 5, but they looked at the whole account of his life and said, you know, he's a man worthy of an honorable send-off because he's what he's done for the nation. And so that charity of the people, that's what I saw as I looked at that last part, how charitable they were in his funeral, even though he messed it up in the last 5 years of his life. There's a number of great principles that are really applicable for you and I, from chapter 16 particularly. I introduced you, I want to make sure that you understood that on the whole, this guy was one of the great kings of Judah. And yet, he, like we're prone to, he messed it up a bit. And he got away from the Lord. And there's always a constant reminder for us, you know, to stick to our faith and keep on with it, because it's easy to drift. And that's really comes to the first thing is, trials and temptations are part of life, and they're going to come at every stage. You know, in year 10, this huge army comes, and he realizes, my only recourse is to call on God and seek God's help. He had been following the Lord, and he's just like, only God can save me. And God does this incredible thing for him. And then 20 years go by, and over the course of those 20 years, he got soft, spiritually soft. Somehow something happened in his walk with God over that passage of time, where when the next big trial came, because when you're king, wars come. And then this next big trial comes, and rather than, he doesn't do what he did before. He doesn't call upon God as he did before. He decides to fix it by his own wisdom. He brainstorms his own solution to the problem. But what's indicative is that somehow or other he had began to neglect his walk with God, and the things that he'd been doing before, he wasn't doing anymore. And so he had experienced this decline. So we need to make sure in our own walk that, you know, we always need to be vigilant in the personal pursuit of God. We need to keep up with our Bible reading. We need to keep up with prayer. We always need to be mindful that we're the ambassadors of Christ, and others need to hear about Jesus from us. And being vigilant as Christians, so that we don't experience this decline that Asa experienced. And the reality is the other reality, which is difficult, but it's true, is every stage of life, there's going to be unique trials, unique troubles that come our way. And to be found faithful along the way through life, keeping in mind that this life is not all that there is. We look forward to being with Christ. We look forward to heaven in the next life. And so it's not this life that we're living for. The second point I want to draw your attention to is that when troubles do come, I found this cute little problem. Fully rely on God. I never heard of that acronym before. But when trouble or challenges come, we're not to rely upon our own strength, our own smarts, our own wisdom. It's God we're supposed to call on. That's what distinguished him in the beginning part of his reign. He said, I don't have the strength, I don't have the power, I don't have the wisdom, God, I just need you to supply. The second time that comes around, And he tries to figure it out on his own. And we'll talk about the wisdom of the world in a second. But the point is when you and I don't know what to do, rather than jump and say, well, I know what to do, we should start there, should we? Just to jump out and say, I think I know what to do in this situation, and bypass praying about it or seeking counsel or taking time to think, we miss an important part. Prayer ought to be a continual part of our life, that communion between us and God, and saying, I'm going to pray about this. I know what to do. Maybe you really do know what to do, but still commit it to the Lord and seek His face and His favor. And he didn't do that. James chapter 1 verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. I think that's an awesome promise. That's what God said. He says, if you don't know what to do, ask me, and I'll help you, and I'll get you through. That's a promise. That's an amazing promise. You humble yourself before God and say, I do not know what to do here. I don't know what to say here. I don't know how to handle this situation, this problem that's beyond me. God, I need your help and your wisdom. And you do what you can to prepare, but then you go, and it's amazing how God answers and gives you the right words at the right time and gives you His wisdom. Because God says, you ask, and I will supply what you at that particular point. That is the third point. So don't forget the frog. Fully rely on God. The next point is we need to guard against going with the wisdom of the world, even though, this is something we know, even though it often works out in the short term. That's the real thing that shines out, and this is something that as a reminder to us, be on guard against the wisdom of the world. The wisdom of the world says, here comes a problem. I've got enough money. I can pay this guy to go away. And so he does. And it works. That's the kicker. It actually works. But it was totally wrong because it was all about him. And not only he ripped off God's temple to do it. I love this little cartoon picture I saw. I found this last night. Success is not always what you see. You see the little carrot sprout and the giant carrot and the big sprout versus that's what this passage is about. That's what, on the surface, it looked like what he did was completely successful. All outward indications were that this was a huge success on his part. He looked wise. He looked like he'd done something amazing. And yet he hadn't done something amazing at all. He'd actually done something extremely wrong. And you have to be careful, is the way of the world often will work, and it might work for decades. And you and I are tempted at times to get kind of bitter about that, because when wicked people prosper, and when righteous people suffer for doing what's right, we get kind of wound up about that. In fact, there's a whole psalm written about this. Psalm 73. I won't read the whole psalm. You check it out. It's a fantastic psalm about what happens when you see people around you who are just rocking their way through life, doing whatever they want, and seemingly having a great time and never having any problems, and yet you're trying to follow God. And every step you take, it's like you're stuck in mud. And life is just hard. And you're like, is this worth it? Well, the psalmist wrote about that in Psalm 73. He says, surely God is good to Israel. He starts out with positive. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped, and I nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. He says, God's amazing, but I'm having a real hard time staying faithful. Because every time I look around, I see wicked people living easy lives. And their wisdom of the world seems to be working out. And when I try to live God's way, which is true wisdom, it just seems hard. And he says, I almost lost my way. But then he tracked down through the passage, and he works his way through it. He says in verse 16, when I tried to understand all of this, it troubled me deeply until I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny. He got a bigger picture. He says, it's not just this life that one has to think about. There is a judgment day that's coming. There's an accounting that's given to God. And he said, it only made sense when I got the bigger picture in my head. That judgment day is coming. And that the wicked may prosper for a time, but one day they're going to have to give an account of the way they've lived to God. And then the rewards will be handed out to those that are righteous. And so having a bigger picture. Check out Psalm 73. It's a fantastic passage when you and I are struggling with staying faithful, when we see people succeeding in everything else while we're trying to stay true to God. But for a short term, sometimes the wisdom of this world is going to work out for people. But you and I have to stay faithful to God in the midst of it. And it looked like Asa did the right thing, but he totally did the wrong thing because he didn't go to God and he did it on his own strength. Fourth thing that we need to do is, we're not very good at this at all. We need to resolve to take correction well. Half of the passage and half the chapter has to do with what happens when the prophet comes and says, you did what was wrong. And because of you did what was wrong, you're going to have hard times now. There's going to be war is not going to leave your side. And Asa, rather than being humble, rather than being godly, rather than being gracious, totally freaks out. He does not like what he's hearing. He doesn't like it so much that he says, you know what, you are going to jail for talking to me like that. And not only that, he then takes it out. It says he oppressed some of the people. I wonder who some of the people were. I'm guessing it's other people that were devout. Other people that were really trying to follow God who might have been, say, hey, you know what, someone's got to, what the king did was wrong when he emptied God's temple. I'm thinking those other people were those people. He begins to oppress people. So here's this one who followed God faithfully for 35 years. And now he's oppressing the people of God and not accepting the rebuke that was meant to restore him to a right walk with God. And the point there is, you know, sometimes you and I get off the rails spiritually as Christians, and it doesn't just happen when we're baby Christians. You can be like walking with the Lord for 50 years and get sidetracked and start doing the wrong thing and think it's okay. Because we've always rationalized why we're doing what we're doing and think to convince ourselves we're really good at convincing ourselves that what we do is all right. And then someone comes to us and says, you know, the Bible actually says you shouldn't be doing that. A lot of times what the first response is we get our back up. And we get angry and we get hostile and we're like, you have no right to judge me, and whatever else we want to say. And it's also complicated by the fact that sometimes when people approach us, they don't have the right heart in it either, right? They got the right words, but they got the wrong attitude. And that makes things worse because then we're angry that they were so unloving in the way they told us. But the truth is still the truth, whether it's the messenger is kind of messed up too. And so the question is when someone comes to you and I and says, you know what, let's say they come in the best possible way. You know, we love you in the Lord. I'm a little bit concerned about you. You know, here's a Bible passage. I want you to think about it. That's the best possible way someone could ever come to us to talk about something in their life, isn't it? We could still get all bent out of shape and say, wow, well, who are you to come talk to me? But the point is we need to learn from him and say, you know what, when the Word of God is presented, and my life is not in accord with the way that Christ says I'm supposed to live, I'm supposed to change. I'm supposed to say I'm sorry to God and begin to work on this area of my life so that I can be more like Christ. But the struggle is we get quite hostile sometimes when someone tries to say something to us. And so we take a lesson and say, you know, I need to resolve to take correction well. The fact is, we all need coaching, don't we? You know, and if we say I don't need coaching, then we're struggling with a little bit. Our attitude's out of place. In fact, I know I need coaching. I can't go anywhere without my wife helping me. She helps me along the way. And in marriage, you're supposed to help each other. And sometimes you don't like when your wife is saying stuff to you, or sometimes you don't like when your husband's saying stuff to you. But the point is, wherever the correction is coming from, wherever the coaching is coming from, you and I need to weigh what's being said ultimately against, is this really true in accord with what the Word of God says how to live? And then make every effort to bring our life around the right way. Finishing well is kind of a big deal. Asa, no one's going to say that he finished well. He didn't finish well. The last 5 years of his life were not good years for him as it regarded his walk with the Lord. And as I think about getting older, as we go through the years, sometimes we tend to hold on to things that we haven't forgiven from the years past. We get bitter about stuff, or we get resentful. We struggle with getting grumpy as we get older, more fixed in our ways. And we think about, how do I want to finish my life as a Christian? What do I want to be known for? When the service is happening in the church or the funeral home, what do I want to be said about me? And we think, okay, I want to finish well. I want to be known as someone that loved the Lord, that was kind to other people. The character of Christ was seen in my life. I'm still involved in praying. I'm still involved in evangelism. I still have a servant's heart. That's about finishing well, isn't it? And the lesson is finishing well is a big deal. And so we say, okay, I'm going to keep on in my walk with Christ. I'm going to keep feeding myself spiritually. I'm going to keep looking for opportunities to serve other people. And I'm not going to stop. There's no age where I can stop doing that, because I want to get to the finish line. And I want to finish this race. So, the Eisenhower's actually, John always quotes, he always finishes his little letter, for the one from Mozambique, with pressing on. And where does that come from? It comes from Philippians 3:12. I press on to take hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. It's keeping our eyes fixed on the finish line, on Christ, on the life to come. So pressing on. And then the last point is a real neat verse, the key verse of chapter 16. Is in the midst of rebuking Asa, the prophet says these words. He says, "The eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him." What a great statement about God. This is a picture of God. It says, God is actually looking around all the time to find those who are seeking after Him, and His desire is to help them in their time of need. That's the heart of God, looking out for His children, looking to supply them and strengthen them and aid them and give them what they need. And so I hope you'll take that verse to heart. It's a great encouragement about this is our God, who actually cares about the circumstances of our life. Waiting upon Him is the hard part. That's the really hard part. But it doesn't change the truth that He cares and loves for us, and He's looking to help us. And he does supply our need in ways unexpected, and yet being faithful. And so, Asa, just as we wrap it up, he was for most of his life, he was an amazing and godly man. But he didn't finish well. You and I got to resolve to finish well. The big lesson is, and the reason I was thinking about this, why did Ezra spend 3 chapters talking about him? Well, because he wanted people to realize that, just starting with God is not enough. You have to finish as well. He pointed out the great success that he had early in his life when he called up to God and God delivered him. And then he points out, by the way, this happened 20 years went by, and then he relied on his own strength. And the lesson to people returning from that captivity was, God is looking to help you, and He will help you. You got to have your heart fixed on Him, though. But you always got to be asking Him for His strength and His help, and not relying on your own. To Him we must always be looking, and He will come through. And that's why Ezra spends 3 chapters versus Kings when there's only half a chapter given to him, because he says there's a lot to learn from the life of one of your good kings. And then, just as at the last point, just before we sing, there was a beautiful song by Don Moen called "Like Eagles" that we'll sing together now. But I also really liked how charitable the people were. To be gracious and kind to people, even when they mess up, is a big thing. not ignoring their sin, but the fact that they gave him such a nice send-off is a telling thing. Because they evaluated his life, not based on a 5-year period, but they evaluated it based on the whole. And they said, you know what, this was a good guy on the whole. And so we're giving him a proper send-off. And that kind of grace needs to sort of permeate into our lives when we interact with each other. Let's stand and sing as we sing our song, and we're going to celebrate